In 1559, King Henry II of France entered the jousting arena to celebrate the marriage of his daughter to King Philip II of Spain. Facing Gabriel de Montgomery, the captain of his Scottish Guard, the match took a devastating turn. Montgomery's lance shattered upon impact, and a splinter pierced the king's eye, embedding deeply into his brain. Despite the efforts of renowned surgeons Ambroise Paré and Andreas Vesalius, Henry endured 10 days of agony before succumbing to his injuries on July 10, 1559. This was not only a tragedy for France, but also marked the decline of jousting as a sport in the country. If a king, armored from head to toe, could fall to a single splinter, what about the unarmed spectators sitting mere feet from the action? Today on Binge History, we're exploring just how dangerous the front row was at medieval jousting tournaments. Before we talk about the dangers, let's first cover the basics. Originating in the 11th century as military training for knights, jousting later evolved into a sport of skill, honor, and entertainment. By the 13th century, these tournaments became public events, often held to celebrate significant occasions like royal weddings or military victories. They drew massive crowds from all levels of society, from nobles to peasants, eager to witness the thrilling spectacle. On jousting days, merchants set up stalls offering roasted meats, sweet pastries, and colorful trinkets. Children wove through the bustling crowd, while peasants and nobles jostled for the best viewing spots. The air buzzed with chatter, laughter, and the occasional neigh of a warhorse, setting the scene for a day of drama and danger. At the heart of these events were the knights, highly trained and often nobly born. A knight's equipment wasn't just decorative. Helmets protected the head, cuirasses shielded the torso, and lances were crafted to splinter on impact for added drama. Over time, jousting evolved, and safety measures like blunted lances became common. By the late medieval period, knights typically wore full plate armor, which offered maximum protection while still allowing them to move. The goal of the joust was simple. Knights would charge at full speed, aiming their lances at their opponent's shield or armor. Points were awarded for striking a target, with higher scores given for breaking the lance or unseating the opponent. The matches took place in a special area called the lists, which was a long, narrow, roped-off field. A key feature was the tilt, a wooden barrier that divided the two knights as they charged. This barrier guided their paths and prevented direct collisions to ensure a more controlled contest. Initially, the barrier was just a simple cloth divider, but by the 15th century, wooden tilts became the standard, making the contest safer and more structured. Around the lists, additional barriers were set up to keep spectators at a safe distance, so they could enjoy the action without the risks of charging horses or falling knights. The seating mirrored the strict social order of the time. Nobles and dignitaries had the closest and most comfortable areas. They often occupied elevated platforms known as beffreux, which provided a prime view of the jousting events. Meanwhile, commoners crowded into the less favorable areas farther from the lists. Around the field, pavilions were often set up to shelter knights and their entourages. Heralds and marshals ensured the rules were followed, while squires worked busily preparing the knights' armor and horses. So how dangerous was it really to sit and watch a jousting match? Lances in medieval jousting were designed to shatter upon impact, creating dramatic moments while reducing the risk of fatal injuries for knights. However, the danger was far from eliminated for participants. Beyond the well-known tragedy of King Henry II of France, there is a famous portrait of a 16th century Hungarian knight, Gregor Bacsi, who survived a traumatic lance injury to the head. Remarkably, he lived with this injury for a year. But the risk wasn't limited to participants. Spectators, who wore no armor for protection, faced significant hazards as well. When lances broke apart, sharp wooden fragments could fly in all directions, often with dangerous speed and force. Historical records recount instances where such splinters pierced clothing, skin, and even vital organs, leading to injuries, some of them fatal. For those seated in the front rows, the threat was all too real. Without safety gear or barriers, spectators had little more than their reflexes and luck to protect them. While knights faced each other with skill and precision, their war horses added an unpredictable element to the joust. These horses, often referred to as destriers, were meticulously trained for battle, but even the best training couldn't entirely prevent panic. The energy of the crowd, the deafening sound of lances colliding, and the chaotic movements on the field could sometimes overwhelm the horses. During the match, knights often aimed to unhorse their opponents, as this not only showcased their abilities but also entertained the audience. Moreover, if a jouster unseated his opponent, he could gain the loser's horse, usually his most valuable piece of property. However, when a knight was unseated, it wasn't uncommon for his horse to veer off course, charging directly into the spectator areas. Geoffrey II, Duke of Brittany, was unseated during a tournament and subsequently trampled to death by his own horse. This incident prompted his father, King Henry II of England, to temporarily ban jousting due to its dangers. For spectators, the sight of a 1,000-pound war horse barreling toward the stands was terrifying and left little room for escape. The dangers didn't end with flying splinters and runaway horses. While jousting was a structured one-on-one contest of skill, tournaments often expanded the spectacle into larger melees, involving groups of knights in mock battles, often using the same weapons and armor as they would in real combat. These melee tournaments were closely related to jousts and often took place as part of the same event, adding another layer of risk for spectators. The lack of safety measures in melee tournaments meant real injuries, and even deaths were not uncommon. Errant strikes from swords or other weapons could easily spill over into the spectator areas, injuring onlookers who had no protection. One of the most infamous incidents occurred in 1273 during a tournament near Chalon. The Duke of Burgundy attempted to pull King Edward I off his horse, an act Edward considered dishonorable. Enraged, Edward galloped away, dragging the Duke along the ground. The situation escalated as foot soldiers from both sides entered the fray, shooting crossbow bolts at each other. The melee became known as the Little Battle of Chalon, resulting in deaths among both participants and spectators. In the early days of jousting, spectators had virtually no protection. Tournaments were often held in open fields with nothing to separate the crowd from the charging knights and their horses. Although the introduction of the tilt helped reduce some risks for the participants, these barriers didn't entirely solve the problem for the audience. Knights who veered off course could still come dangerously close to the crowd, and flying debris from shattered lances often bypassed the tilt entirely. For those in the stands, the excitement of the joust always carried a risk. The physical structures of tournament arenas were another hazard. Temporary wooden stands were hastily erected to accommodate large crowds, but were often poorly constructed. Similarly, the barriers surrounding the lists were often temporary and poorly built. These barriers frequently failed under the pressure of knights charging or falling into them. During melees, knights sometimes crashed through the wooden barriers, carrying the chaos into the spectator areas and injuring bystanders. Adding to the danger, the crowds themselves could become a hazard. With people jostling for better views, fights occasionally broke out among overenthusiastic spectators. Chroniclers of medieval tournaments describe instances of individuals being trampled in stampedes or injured during scuffles. Recognizing these dangers, the Catholic Church repeatedly attempted to ban tournaments and jousting, citing the high number of injuries and deaths alongside moral concerns. Clerics argued that these events glorified violence and distracted knights from their religious duties. However, these efforts were largely unsuccessful. Luckily, while watching medieval jousting may have been risky, watching it on Binge History is perfectly safe and endlessly fascinating. So make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to Binge History for more thrilling stories from the past.